planned topic, and that is redistricting. So, as Annastacia said, redistricting are the maps in which you make a decision, right? We don't elect state representatives or state senators at large. We represent them to represent a district. Part of the census drives the exercise of drawing these maps. Now, under our state constitution, in theory, the maps should be drawn by the legislature and then signed by the governor.
What a good theory.
That's the theory. Over the last number of times maps have been drawn, has that actually occurred?
No. Is the really short answer. So not since, I believe, at least the 1960s cycle that's not entirely true. So there hasn't been litigation over whether or not the maps were passed properly and by the legislature since the 1960s. And I phrase it that way because in every decade since the 1960s, either the legislature has not been able to agree on a map to send to the governor, or the governor has vetoed that map that was agreed upon by the legislature. The only exception being 1992, when Governor Arne Carlson intended to veto the map, but didn't actually veto the map. He didn't veto it. He had like a 3-day period and didn't do it right, and that was a whole nother litigation mess that went to the Supreme Court. So the point is, been too much litigation, too much mistakes, too much non-agreement over whether or not to pass the map through the legislature. So we've gone decades and decades and decades of a broken system. And what's happened in each of those circumstances where a map was not passed is that it goes to a panel of judges. Either the Supreme Court or the federal court, whichever one the petition was made to, ends up putting together a panel of 3 to 5 judges who end up drawing the map based on the maps the legislature passed or proposed.
See, perfect.
Yes, and so often, and that's the point that I know that Common Cause likes to talk about, which is true, is that the maps that are passed by the legislature are not impartial maps. So the courts typically take those suggestions, alter it, and the literal case law is to alter it as minimally as possible to make it, and then pass those minimally altered maps. So it's not an ideal map, it's just like a map that met the baseline. So that's where redistricting sits in Minnesota now.
Nick, talk about what are some of the tensions in having the legislature be the starting point for a map?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's like, we like to say it's the fox guarding the hen house. You know, the point of redistricting is to draw a map that is representative of the voters and will empower the voters. At least that's how a map should be drawn. But when the legislators draw their maps, the legislators have an interest in drawing a map that will protect their party, ensure that they're reelected, or punish their opponents. You know, there are legislators who will say, I want a map that doesn't pair me with an incumbent, even if that map is drawn because that's what's most representative of that community and most appropriately reflects the changes in the demographics and changes in population. I don't want to be paired with an incumbent because that means I have to run against my friend for a job. And so they will ask for a map to be drawn in just the right way so that they don't have to be paired with an incumbent. So that is, and then you get into the bigger issues of like racial and partisan gerrymandering to protect either dilute the effective vote of a particular race, members of voters of a race, or to dilute the political power of a party, which are bigger issues that are in the Rucho and other cases that the Common Cause has been a part of. League is part of a couple of those as well. And so the long story short is that when the legislature draws the maps, there's a conflict of interest, and that the people they are drawing for their own party and their own jobs. The interest should be solely draw a map that accurately reflects voters and representation of voters, and not consider things like, do we want to protect a specific race, or do we want to protect a specific incumbent, or do we want to protect a specific party? That is not something that should be part of that process, but unfortunately, when legislators draw the maps, those considerations tend to come up constantly.
So the legislature, knowing this history of going to the courts, has proposed last year and this year different approaches. If you could maybe summarize those approaches, but then talk about the approach Common Cause is trying to push.
Yeah. So currently, I'm just going to give you the highlights of 3 current bills that are in technical play right now at the legislative body. We've got 3 House bills, and I'm going to go slow so that you get the numbers. The first House bill is House File 1603. House File 1603 is the Elections Omnibus Bill that contains our bill, which is 1605. Okay. What we're proposing is a redistricting advisory committee. And the reason why we're proposing an advisory committee is because our main focus for the past 2.5 years has been in 3 key things. 1, creating something that involves public members, that everyday Minnesotans are able to sit on and be a part of, be equal people, right, at the table. The second thing we wanted to do was increase transparency and accountability, okay? And the third thing that we want to do it, and actually the reason why we did the other 2 is because we want to do it to protect the 2021 redistricting cycle, okay? So that's the one thing. It's an advisory redistricting commission. The other 2 involve a constitutional amendment that would put the question to Minnesota voters on the November 2020 ballot, okay? The gist of it is, should a redistricting commission be created to draw the district maps? I'm trying to clarify. Under the Minnesota Constitution, okay? That file, that House file number is House File 1855. It is led by Representative Schultz from Duluth, Democrat. The other bill is also led by Representative Schultz in the House, and that is the companion bill to Senator Kiffmeyer's constitutional amendment redistricting bill that also puts the question in 11 of 2020 on the ballot, but in her bill, she actually provides structure of what that redistricting commission is going to look like and some process and redistricting principles. So the structure is just 4 hand-picked public members that are not judges or retired judges by the House minority and majority leaders. Okay, and the other disqualifier was that they could not have been convicted of some kind of misbehavior, could not have been found to have violated some kind of disciplinary or something or other.
Oh, the judges?
Yeah. No, not the judges.
The public
she
members.
had, yeah, the public members could not have. There was some language that was like common sense that disqualified certain people. And she also had some redistricting principles. Her redistricting principles are not the best. We have several concerns with them, which I can share in a Q&A type of format. But for now, there's some redistricting principles there that we have concerns with, and the model we definitely have concerns with, because all it does is create a hyper-partisan environment where you have hand-picked friends, right, from each side, and you only have 4. How do you need a supermajority? How are you going to get the supermajority? And even if you had a supermajority, they could do what they do in Illinois, which is, how do we redistrict in a way that we're negotiating now amongst the 2 parties how we're going to gerrymander?
So,
okay.
So the common cause idea is in the House elections omnibus?
Right.
But there's no Senate companion moving?
We do have a Senate companion bill. The Senate companion bill is Senate File 2575.
Who's the author?
That's Senator Franzen, and we have Senator Abler. We've got a bipartisan bill. We've been actively like getting people, we're hoping to have more people that told us that they would join fairly soonly as well. The point of these three bills, 2 constitutional amendment, we do not support those. I already told you why I don't support Senator Kiffmeyer's bill that Representative Schultz is carrying. That bill is choked in committee. I'm not seeing it. My understanding is that that bill is not going to get a hearing. It was more of a vehicle bill. And I think, quite frankly, good strategy, because if the Democrats took it, now Republicans don't have room to run with it. The other bill, the 1855 bill, this is the reason, I'm going to tell you why Common Cause does not support that bill at this time. We do not support that bill at this time because it is not structured to protect the 2021 redistricting cycle. Why is that? Because the ballot question is put in 11/20 after the session has already been done with, and the bill itself contains no process, no structure within it to allow for something to be put in place in 2021. So that means that they would have to do one of 2 things in the House. 1, by the miracle of all miracles known to man, they're going to come up with yet another bill to try to lay out what that structure would look like, and somehow the Senate Republicans are going to jump on board and move the process and structure bill, because it's statutory. In the constitutional amendment bill that she drafted, she refers to statutory language laying out the process and procedure. So she leaves it to a bit for a separate bill to establish that structure and that procedure, that process that the body is going to follow, right? So at this point, say a constitutional amendment happens to pass the House and the Senate by the majority, and then happens, we're just going to pretend here, happens that in November of 2020, the majority of all voters actually check off a yes. Not the majority of who answered the question, the majority of all voters, which is huge, okay? But let's pretend, woohoo, magic wand, that happens, okay? You're looking at 11/20/20. Yay, we have a constitutional amendment. Now what? Well, according to the amendment language, now you have to wait till the session starts in 2021 to then move a separate bill that lays all that out, okay? That's the first hurdle. The second hurdle with that bill is that as you're trying to build the momentum of the constitutional amendment for 2020, right? People are asking, oh, so what's the process and how's this going to look like? Is it a 5-member commission? Is it a 20-member commission? And right now what they've been saying is directing the language to our language. Oh, that's contained in the Elections Omnibus Bill. And people are like, okay, so hang on a second. I'm going to vote in support of a constitutional amendment that has no defined nothing in it, and that we're crossing our fingers and hoping gets passed in time by Sine Die in the end of May 2020 right? So that's the other concern. The last concern is that if we do move the question of the constitutional amendment, and it does actually move, and the Democrats flip the Senate, which is the strategy behind the constitutional amendment, is to use it as a vehicle to get enough votes from independents to say, oh, if you want an independent research commission, you need to help us flip the Senate so that we can give it to you. What assures us that when they have control over it, they're not going to gerrymander the 2021 process, and then they're then going to sit with us and try to negotiate what an independent redistricting commission is going to look like? That makes no sense. Our bill provides an answer now. The trick is, our bill doesn't care what the Democrats want or what the Republicans want. That's the problem. That's why our bill is stuck in committee. Now I've got the mic. That's why our bill is stuck in committee, because it doesn't go along with the leadership strategy in the House, okay? And it's jacking up Kiffmeyer's digging of the heels. Well, if you're not going to give me a bill, I'm not going to give you a bill. And common sense reform is being left choked. But no worries, I have a plan.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say that, you know, the league agrees on many fronts. It's not that we don't want a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, we don't mind it.
The league wants a fully independent.
We do too.
Yeah, the league wants a fully independent redistricting commission. The problem is that we know that amending the Constitution is a big deal, and you got to get that language right. Not only because you got to make sure that people will vote for it, that voters will approve that constitutional amendment, but also because if you don't have everything well defined and laid out when you pass that amendment, then there's just going to inevitably be more litigation over what that amendment means and how is it carried out, and what if they don't pass a bill that lays out the process? Then where are you left at? You're left out with saying that there needs to be 5 public members for a commission, and you are supposed to find out that process in the law, and the law doesn't tell you what that says, so where are you left? So it's not, we want an independent commission, but if you're going to pass a constitutional amendment, you got to do it right. You got to do your work, you got to do it right, and ideally it would be nice, properly vetted, because, thank you for saying that, because the constitutional amendment that was dropped by Representative Schultz was done as a delete all amendment in committee that day. And let me tell you what a delete all amendment. A delete all amendment is where you take the bill, you delete the entire contents, you put in a new bill, right? And I'm not trying to throw down on all delete all amendments. There's a good reason why that happens sometimes, because it's just easier to say, replace the whole bill rather than go through and say we changed every single 36 lines of this in different places. Sometimes it's easier just to say we replaced the whole bill. So delete all amendments make sense sometimes, but it gets difficult to track and difficult to have a discussion about what that bill says, especially when it's a constitutional amendment. So if you're gonna come to committee and say, by the way, this is now a constitutional amendment, I've deleted everything and I put in this new language, you have 20 minutes to talk about it, and this is going to committee, and then it passes through the next committee without any substantive discussion, then essentially, if this goes to the floor, and it's passed off the floor without any substantive discussion, then you are proposing a constitutional amendment without any substantive discussion about what that constitutional amendment means, what its effects are. So, again, not opposed to constitutional amendment. Constitutional amendments for an independent commission are fine, but constitutional amendments are a big deal. You gotta be careful about what you're doing, and you gotta do it.
Well, and I think everybody in this room knows that Common Cause has led in the country.
League 2.
We were the first ones in California to move an independent redistricting commission. So anybody that tells you out there that Common Cause does not support a constitutional amendment or independent redistricting commission is confused, okay? Because we've been leading in that direction. What we won't do is support symbolic bills. Especially when there's actually something we can move to address the issue, right? There's nothing that says that we cannot move an independent redistricting commission in 2022 after we've protected the 2021 cycle, right? And maybe even be able to use that as best practices to say, hey, look, we tried it and it worked. Let's do an independent redistricting commission, right? But then that doesn't fall into the talking points.
So my takeaway is an independent, citizen involved redistricting commission is the goal.
That's the goal.
A constitutional amendment in its current structure is not the optimum vehicle because of both the timing, pragmatic sort of implementation issue you articulated and the process one of it came up in the form of a DE, which means who knows if it's been thoroughly vetted. Okay, so given that that's sort of the state of where we're at,